What's up, everybody? This is FTW with Ahmad Khan. I'm your host, Ahmad Khan, and joining me today is Will Hershey of Roundhill Investments.
Thanks for having me.
Later on, we'll have reporter Joseph Franco to discuss the continuing exodus of Overwatch players to Valorant, and we'll be introducing our new segment, Fan of the Week. But first, Tencent. President Trump signed an executive order on August 6th banning transactions with two Chinese companies for 45 days. One is with ByteDance, the owners of the app TikTok, and the other is with Tencent Holdings, which owns Riot Games, publisher of League of Legends, Valorant, Teamfight Tactics, Wild Rift, and Legends of Runeterra. Tencent also has major stakes in Supercell, the Finnish developer behind Clash of Clans, Clash Royale, and Brawl Stars. And we can't forget about Epic Games, publishers of Fortnite, which Tencent has a minority stake in. The White House alleges that WeChat, quote, automatically captures vast swaths of information from its users and, quote, threatens to allow the Chinese Communist Party access to Americans' personal and proprietary information. White House officials have told the LA Times, however, that video game companies owned by Tencent will not be affected by the executive order. So, Will, gaming and esports fans safe at the moment, or is there still cause for concern?
Yeah, I think for the moment we're safe. If you look at the text of the respective executive orders, my read on it right out the gate, and it sounds like the LA Times is kind of confirming this, is when it comes to ByteDance, which is TikTok, it's kind of any business with that company or its subsidiaries, the entire entity is going to be potentially in trouble or at risk here. With regards to Tencent, it kind of seems as though really they're targeting WeChat in particular, which would mean that really the gaming properties, including the ones that you mentioned, are probably not at risk for now. And I think really what this speaks to is something that maybe is becoming a recurring theme is with this administration is really not considering all the consequences of when you put out an executive order like this, what it could mean. But I think based on what we're hearing right now, the intentions are not to affect the gaming properties, although there's certainly data involved with playing video games as well. Maybe it's not to the same degree as it is using a messaging service, but there's certainly data that are being collected by gaming companies, including those that Tencent owns a majority stake in. But then again, look at what Tencent also holds. They own 5% of Activision Blizzard too. They own a piece of Discord. They also own not that small, but meaningful stakes in Uber and Tesla. So there's like a lot of different moving parts here. I think really they're just trying to go after WeChat. At least that's my hope.
There's a lot of conversation about whether the president even has the authority to do this executive order. And the president does seem, since the beginning of his administration, has been using executive orders because it's like the only unilateral thing he can do and doesn't have to go through Congress. So there's definitely a bit of discussion on essentially how far he can get away with this. And of course, the Chinese government is upset with this entire thing because they claim that this is a bid to essentially force a sale of TikTok to an American company, i.e., there's kind of a deadline for Microsoft, which has been in talks to buy TikTok, to essentially close the deal. And since the presidency is pushing this deal and putting it on a deadline, it might actually force TikTok's hand to sell at a lower price because, it's either you sell to us or you're out. As somebody in the investment world, this is kind of bizarre, isn't it?
It's definitely bizarre, and I've had the same kind of thoughts go through my mind. Effectively now, what you have in TikTok is one of the most prized assets in all of technology, definitely within social media, that now, if in fact this is going to happen, they almost become from as something everyone wants a piece of to kind of almost distressed, where you're exactly right. The power shifts from them to whoever the potential buyer it is. Clearly, it looks like it's potentially going to be Microsoft. But this also, coming back to the Tencent side of this also brings up questions around what they would have to do with those majority stakes in Supercell in Riot Games. One thing I think could make some sense, which I'd be excited to see as a public markets investor in the games industry, would be a spin-off of Riot Games onto a U.S. exchange, which is something that I think when you look at Riot, certainly they get a ton of revenues from China, but they're based in the U.S. I think it could make a lot of sense to really split them off from Tencent in some ways, and it's probably a win-win in that case. Unlike the ByteDance situation where their hands really, really being forced, if Tencent did that, I think it would maybe appease U.S. government in a little bit of a way, but also maybe unlock value for Tencent shareholders. That's something I've been thinking about too. I think you're absolutely right that this administration's kind of going about things in the way that executive orders are the catch-all where you get the ball rolling, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is some level of bipartisan support for going after these apps that are potentially targeting U.S. citizen data. I mean, China's done this exact same thing to us for decades. Literally, almost every app under the sun website from the US is banned in China. I'm kind of surprised it's taken this long for us to do the same. But yeah, I think there's concerns here, and I don't think it's just one side of the table when it comes to politics. I think there's a real concern here.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever been a Chinese kind of social media platform or app that has had the level of reach that TikTok has, right? For me, it's crazy, that Google, Facebook, I assume Twitter, like all these like major platforms are just straight up banned in China because, being American, we allow a level of free speech. And the Chinese Communist Party does not tend to like that. Google has been trying to get back in China and is back in China at the moment at a very limited capacity, which a lot of Google employees are frustrated with. But, it's not only limited to Google. Like even Hollywood, they understand the power of the Chinese market. And a lot of movies and actors that, played roles that were critical of China, like those actors aren't even allowed into the country. Hollywood now has to essentially, if they want to be in China and do well in China, they have to always have some Chinese scene or like some scene in China, like do something to make sure that, they're getting that Chinese revenue. The thing is that when you're playing with an actor that is so against the idea of free speech, like these tensions are bound to happen. And I think the US companies that were kind of greedily going after China, they really should have seen this one coming. I think it was only a matter of time before these incongruencies butted heads with each other.
Yeah, but coming back to what I'd said earlier, the fact that almost everything from the US is banned in China already, there's no kind of tit for tat here from the Chinese side, right? They've already banned everything. The US can ban TikTok and WeChat. The Chinese have already banned everything. Like there's nowhere else to go, at least as it relates to kind of internet-based and kind of this whole concept around data. But you're also talking about something really interesting, which is, and I think we've seen glimpses of this with kind of the Free Hong Kong movement and the NBA, is there's this fine line of trying to do kind of what's right, but also, we've seen NBA superstars that haven't been willing to kind of go out on a limb, if you will, in defense of Hong Kong, because they also recognize how much of their revenue comes from China and how important China is from a strategic standpoint to their overall business. So and I think the economy over the past 20 years has gotten so much more global where everything's interconnected, even between countries that are feuding like US and China. Unfortunately, I think there's probably just at the beginning of what could be kind of this digital Cold War, if you will. But hopefully we can find a solution that works. But it's very difficult from our side to see how that could play out.
And Will, I guess the reason we invited you on the show to begin with was to talk about the Huya and Douyu kind of streaming deals that have been happening this past week. And Tencent is also heavily involved with both of these companies and has been trying to merge them for a while. So, well, I guess let's do a quick kind of overview. Like, what are these two streaming platforms and why are they important?
At the very highest level, for those maybe that aren't familiar, Huya and Douyu look a lot like Twitch does. But as we just talked about, Twitch is one of those platforms that is banned in China. So is YouTube. So really what Huya and Douyu are kind of two most significant live streaming platforms in China. And really what's going on here is Tencent, which owns somewhere around 40%, give or take, of each, is finally pushing towards merging these two platforms into one kind of super giant platform that controls a large majority of the Chinese live streaming market, which, by the way, is roughly 5 times the size of the US's in terms of the number of people engaging with live streaming. And just to give you a little bit of numbers in terms of how big this really is, the combined value of Huya and Douyu, which are both publicly traded actually in the US, will be over 10 billion if in fact this deal goes through. And we're talking about over the past kind of year, combined between those two platforms, $2.5 billion in revenue. Which we don't know what Twitch's revenues are. I'd venture it's probably somewhere less than that. So just to give you an idea of how big this really could become, you're also talking about like 300 million monthly active users, which is almost the population or more than I don't know where the US population is now, but it's right around there. These are really important platforms when it comes to China. And what we've seen play out there over the past several years, which is kind of interesting because we just saw Mixer shut down, is some of the kind of mid-tier streaming platforms have shut down. So you had Chusho TV shut down, you had Panda TV shut down, And really, that's been a result of how competitive live streaming market is, whether you're in the US or in China. And over there, why I think this deal is so important is you have a much more mature live streaming economy. Content creators in China, even we're talking about mid-tier streamers or even lower tier streamers, are on multi-year exclusive contracts with whatever platform they're with. So it's not just the equivalent of Ninja and Shroud signing deals over there. It's the mid-tier players. So what this really does, by potentially merging it would be as if YouTube gaming and Twitch merged, is kind of the best analogy I can give you. You're talking about a power shift from the creators back to what would be the platform. And I think for me, that's really important with regards to the Chinese market. But also, when you look at what this combined company could be, if they merge Huya and Douyu, to me, I think that combined entity becomes a bigger threat to Twitch outside of the US than a YouTube or even a Facebook. And we've already started to see these Chinese platforms, move outside of China, notably into Southeast Asia, into Latin America. And I think this is just like a really big deal if it gets done for kind of the shift of power within the global live streaming industry. Everyone knows Twitch in this part of the world, but these companies they're massive, just based on how many people in China are tuning in every day.
And then there's also been some deals with actual esports tournaments in regards to these companies.
Yep. So I think just this week, Douyu signed an exclusive with MTG, which is the parent company of DreamHack and ESL. Another Chinese streaming platform separate from these, which is Bilibili, just announced that they closed on the League of Legends deal. And to be clear, this is for the exclusive rights basically for Worlds, and I think it's for the All-Star Game and maybe one other tournament, just for China. So just for the Chinese market, they're getting the Mandarin exclusive for those league tournaments. And I'm hearing that the number was, for 3 years, $113 million. Now, that's like almost basically what the YouTube deal with Activision Blizzard esports was, and that includes Hearthstone, Call of Duty, and Overwatch League. To me, that says two things. One, it says how big League is. Two, how big is the Chinese market if they're able to sign an exclusive just for these 3 tournaments and be willing to pay that kind of money? It's like we can't even fathom how much more esports is in terms of viewership base, in terms of mainstream culture in that part of the world than what it is here.
Yeah, the other deal that I think kind of got buried under this was the Dignitas deal with Huya, in which 3 of its Counter-Strike players will start streaming on Huya on August 1st.
I mean, that's an interesting deal. Huya's also done some stuff where they've worked with Western esports teams before. So they have an exclusive, I believe, with Team Liquid for Chinese streaming. What's really interesting and what's going on behind the scenes here is, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the content creators, the casual streamers within China are all locked up. Imagine if like the top 200 streamers in the US were all locked up under multi-year contracts. Where do you go next if you're a streaming platform to try and bring exciting content on your platform? One, you go and you sign deals directly with the esports league operators. So we saw that. And then 2, you're signing directly with teams. And I think it's this natural evolution of kind of, to me, it's interesting that we're getting to the point now where they're starting to sign these deals with individual players. But this is what's going to happen, I believe, in the US as well. So the Chinese market is 3 to 5 years ahead of where the US is in terms of live streaming. And the one last thing I'd say on this that's really interesting that we're starting to see in the US too is live streaming starts as gaming, but it ends up becoming a lot more than that. Just Chatting IRL is probably the fastest growing channel on Twitch. In China, you're already talking about 40% of revenues for these live streaming platforms comes from non-game streaming. And I think it just speaks to the power of streaming platforms. And once again, I think I talked about this last time I was on, but like, this is why all the big tech companies are investing, because gaming is just going to be the way that gets people in the door. But then there's all these other types of content you can deliver via streaming. You can even potentially move towards e-commerce via streaming, where you're actually buying things that you're watching someone interact with. I mean, the upside is endless there, but yeah, no, the Chinese platforms are light years ahead of what we are here.
And I mean, is there any chance, like if Huya and Douyu, whatever their combined entity becomes, if it all goes through, starts to really aggressively push into the US market, I mean, is there just more chance that the White House or Congress could just be like, okay, no, you guys are like siphoning user data. Can't we, like, we're just banning you?
That's a great question. I mean, I think, to my knowledge, that neither of those platforms, as they've been standalone, have tried to do so. But yeah, I mean, like, why would you let a new platform come if you're banning these other ones? I think that that's certainly a risk. You also have Tencent, which is the parent company here. Once again, Tencent owns everything under the sun that's involved in gaming. They recently started to roll out their own streaming platform in the US. I think it's called Trovo. So I think they would probably want to push that product rather than either Huya or Douyu into the US. But that's certainly at risk now, right? Like, to your point, like, who cares what the medium is if it's live streaming versus WeChat messaging? Like, it's all related to the same concept of we don't want our data in any way getting back to the CCP.
And yeah, it's like one of these things where I talk to my friend who, for example, is like really big on TikTok and loves the app, and she thinks that who cares? These like all of these companies are siphoning our data anyway, kind of situation. I tell her that the way the Chinese government operates, the US government has been butting heads with China for years about this stuff, right? China just doesn't seem to really care and kind of just plays by its own rules and does whatever it wants, right? And at a certain point, like, that relationship couldn't continue to be tenable, in my opinion. Like, it was going to blow up. So this is all really fascinating stuff. It's all, tied into inter-geopolitical economics and politics. We'll definitely have you on when more of this develops. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Ahmad.